Have you ever sat down just to try out a game, and suddenly hours have gone by without you even noticing? That's exactly the kind of magic isometric RPGs bring. They combine strategy, exploration, and deep choices in a way that keeps you hooked longer than you expect. Today, I'm sharing some of the very best that deserve a spot on your list. This is Renkai, and let's jump into the video. When people talk about isometric RPGs, Grim Dawn always comes up as one of the most underrated gems of the genre. Released back in 2016 by a team of ex-developers from Titan Quest, this game throws you into the dark and gritty world of Cairn, a land ripped apart by war, cults, and nightmarish creatures straight out of a Lovecraft novel. At first glance, it might look like just another hack-and-slash ARPG, but the more you play, the more you realize how much depth it actually has. The dual-class system is the heart of Grim Dawn, letting you mix two different masteries to create insanely unique builds. Soldier with Occultist? Boom, you've got a Witchblade. Arcanist with Nightblade? Now you're a Spellbreaker, slicing enemies while casting powerful magic. There are over 30 possible class combinations, and each one feels different enough to keep you experimenting for hours. On top of that, the loot system is addictive, pushing you to hunt for legendary gear that completely changes how your character plays. But what really makes Grim Dawn shine is its atmosphere. The ruined villages, foggy forests, and cursed cities feel alive with danger, and every quest pulls you deeper into the lore of a world that refuses to die quietly. With expansions and hundreds of hours of endgame content, Grim Dawn isn't just another Diablo clone. It's a true evolution of the genre, and one of those games that every fan of isometric RPGs should experience at least once. Pillars of Eternity is the game that brought classic isometric RPGs back to life. When it launched in 2015, a lot of people compared it to Baldur's Gate, and for good reason. It carries that same DNA of deep storytelling, tactical combat, and a party full of memorable companions. You play as a Watcher, someone who can see and interact with souls, and right from the start you're pulled into a mystery about life, death, and destiny. The writing here is top tier. Every dialogue choice matters, and the game constantly pushes you to think about morality, politics, and the weight of your decisions. In true Obsidian fashion, there are no easy answers. Sometimes doing the right thing still leaves consequences you'll have to deal with later. Combat is real-time with pause, which means you'll constantly stop to reposition your party, manage abilities, and make sure every spell or arrow lands at the right time. It's challenging, but incredibly rewarding once you master it. The world of Yura feels massive, filled with towns, dungeons, and lore that makes you want to read every book and talk to every NPC. What makes Pillars so special is that it doesn't just copy the old school formula, it modernizes it with slick visuals, quality of life improvements, and a story that sticks with you long after you finish. If you ever wondered why people miss the golden age of isometric RPGs, this game is the answer, and it proves the genre is far from dead. Titan Quest is the kind of game that makes you feel like you're stepping straight into a myth. From the first village in ancient Greece to the deserts of Egypt and the temples of China, it throws you into a journey that feels bigger than life. Every region has its own atmosphere. Ruins crawling with gorgons, dunes haunted by mummies, forests patrolled by satyrs, and the sense of adventure never really fades. What sets this classic apart is the mastery system. Instead of being locked into one class, you pick two and combine them into something completely unique. Pair warfare with defense and you've got a sturdy paladin. Mix spirit with storm and you're an oracle blasting enemies with elemental magic. There are dozens of possible combinations, and experimenting with them becomes just as addictive as chasing loot. Exploration is another hook. You'll stumble into hidden caves, optional bosses, and treasures that can completely change how your build works. And the Anniversary Edition plus expansions only made it better, polishing the original while adding new content to keep players hooked. For me, what keeps Titan Quest so special isn't just the combat or the loot. It's that feeling of traveling through these legendary settings and carving your own path through them. I've spent hours testing masteries, grinding for gear, and just soaking up the atmosphere, and it's still one of my favorite isometric RPGs to revisit. If you want depth, freedom, and that mythological flavor no other game really captures, Titan Quest deserves a spot on your list. Path of Exile 2 takes everything that made the first game a cult giant and pushes it to an entirely new level, refining systems while keeping the depth that fans love. Set years after the events of Rayclast's downfall, the world feels darker, more decayed, and even more hostile, with new regions, enemies, and lore that expand the grim universe. At its core, the game keeps the massive freedom of character building, but introduces a redesigned skill gem system that makes experimentation cleaner and more flexible. Abilities now link directly through items in more intuitive ways, letting players create devastating combos without the clutter of the old system. 12 new classes, each tied to dual ascendancies, open even more paths for creative builds, and the massive passive tree still rewards careful planning and theory crafting. Combat feels faster and heavier, with improved animations and impact that make every strike, spell, or arrow feel dangerous. Boss fights are more dynamic, with phases and mechanics that demand awareness instead of pure damage output. The campaign offers a brand new story spanning multiple acts, designed to stand alongside rather than replace the original, and both games will share the same endgame. Visually, it's stunning, with new lighting, detailed environments, and smoother performance that elevate the atmosphere. Path of Exile 2 is still brutal, still complex, and still unapologetically deep, but it's also more approachable and polished, making it one of the most anticipated isometric RPGs on the horizon. Sacred 2, launched in 2008 with an ambition that most RPGs of its time couldn't match. Ancaria was enormous and seamless, a single world where you could ride from dense forests into deserts, swamps, or icy mountains without a loading screen in sight, and every region was filled with enemies, secrets, and quests that rewarded exploration. The game gave players 6 very different classes, each with its own campaign, and layered on top of that was the choice between light and shadow paths, shifting the tone of the story and the types of missions you'd encounter. What made it stick wasn't just the scale, but the way combat and loot worked together. Fast, chaotic battles that mixed melee, magic, ranged skills, and even mounted fighting, paired with gear drops that constantly encouraged experimentation. And this is where my own experience came in. I remember replaying sections just to test different builds, trying to squeeze every bit of power out of loot I'd found, and realizing how easily the game pulled me into its loop. Sacred 2 had rough edges. I wasn't sharp, and controls could feel clumsy, but the sheer freedom made those flaws easy to forgive. Mods have kept it alive through the years, smoothing out issues and adding content, and with a remaster on the way, it's finally getting the attention it always deserved. For me, Sacred 2 remains a flawed gem, but one of the most rewarding isometric RPGs to revisit if you crave scale and freedom. Titan Quest 2 brings back the spirit of the original while pushing it into a modern era, and even in early access it already shows how much potential it has. Set once again in a mythological version of ancient Greece, the story begins with Nemesis, the goddess of retribution, twisting the threads of fate and unleashing chaos across the land. The world is vast and open, filled with ruined temples, cursed swamps, sunlit islands, and hidden caverns, each packed with enemies that demand strategy and awareness. Combat feels faster and more responsive than the first game, leaning heavily into action while still rewarding tactical thinking. The mastery system returns with refinements, giving you a set of paths to combine into unique classes. And even in early access, there are already exciting synergies to discover, with more promised as development continues. Modifiers let you customize abilities further, turning familiar spells into devastating variations that completely alter how you approach encounters. Exploration is another highlight, with dynamic events and optional bosses that reward curiosity, while co-op multiplayer opens the door for 4 players to take on challenges together. Visually, it's striking, with environments that feel alive and enemies that hit harder and smarter than before, though being in early access means performance and balance are still evolving. Titan Quest 2 might not be finished yet, but it already captures the addictive loop of building, looting, and fighting, and it's shaping up to be a worthy continuation of a franchise that defined isometric action RPGs for an entire generation. The Age of Decadence slams the door in your face and dares you to try anyway. This is a game built to test your patience, your creativity, and your willingness to live with failure. Set in a crumbling empire inspired by the fall of Rome, it drops you into a society of scheming nobles, mercenaries, merchants, and cultists, chasing scraps of forgotten magic. What makes it unforgettable is the freedom to shape your role in this dying world. There are no fixed classes. Your character is defined entirely by the skills you invest in. Put points into persuasion, and suddenly you're twisting noble houses around your finger. Focus on sneak and critical strike, and you're slipping daggers between ribs before anyone realizes. But misjudge a situation, and the game won't hesitate to kill you on the spot. Combat is turn-based and brutally punishing, with action points dictating every move and armor slowing you down just enough to make each decision feel risky. Yet here's the beauty. You don't have to fight at all. Some of the richest storylines are built around avoiding combat through diplomacy, manipulation, or pure cunning. The writing reacts to nearly everything you do, with entire questlines branching or collapsing based on your choices. It's harsh, it's uncompromising, and it makes every victory feel earned. The Age of Decadence isn't here to entertain you casually, it's here to challenge you. And that's exactly why it's one of the most unique isometric RPGs out there. Wasteland 3 drops you into a frozen Colorado where survival is harsh and every decision reshapes the story around you. Leading a squad of desert rangers, you're tasked with securing alliances in a land torn apart by cults, gangs, and families hungry for power, and the game never lets you forget the weight of leadership. Squad customization goes deep, with stats, perks, and gear shaping not only combat efficiency, but also how characters influence conversations and quests, opening paths others might miss. The turn-based combat is sharp, built around positioning, cover, and abilities that punish sloppy planning, and every encounter feels like a puzzle with multiple outcomes. Midway through my own playthrough, I realized how quickly the game forces you into hard choices. One mission kept supplies flowing, but angered a faction I had grown attached to, and that tension stayed with me long after it ended. It's in these moral gray areas that the experience thrives, mixing tactical precision with narrative weight in a way few RPGs manage. The writing blends dark humor with bleak scenarios, making every quest feel unpredictable, while branching outcomes ensure no two runs play the same. For me, it's this balance of brutal combat and meaningful choices that makes Wasteland 3 one of the most impactful isometric RPGs of the past decade. Shadowrun Hong Kong begins with a desperate call that drags you into the heart of a city pulsing with neon lights, corporate power, and hidden magic. The story wastes no time pulling you into conspiracies where every decision can shift alliances and shape the outcome of entire missions. Building your character defines not just combat, but also the way the world reacts, since skills in hacking, summoning, or brute force unlock unique paths through dialogue, exploration, and battle. Companions deepen the tactical side, riggers controlling drones, deckers diving into the matrix, shamans summoning spirits, and every run feels different depending on who you bring. Combat itself is turn-based and tense, rewarding careful positioning and smart use of abilities rather than raw strength. What struck me most while playing was how often I stopped to rethink my approach, replaying encounters to see what would change if I leaned on diplomacy instead of violence, or magic instead of firepower. The writing gives weight to these choices, filling every district with characters who feel grounded in a world both futuristic and mystical. From cramped alleys to corporate towers, the atmosphere pulls you deeper, and each mission feels like a test of both strategy and judgment. Shadowrun might not dazzle with spectacle, but it thrives on immersion, meaningful consequences, and the unique flavor of a city caught between technology and tradition. Baldur's Gate 3 is one of those RPGs that doesn't really need much of an introduction. It's a favorite for countless players around the world, and to be honest, it's one of mine too. That alone makes it a natural addition to this list. The game begins with your character infected by a mind flayer parasite, setting up a journey where survival depends not just on combat, but on the decisions you make and the alliances you form. The freedom is what makes it stand out. You can build your own character from scratch or step into the shoes of an origin hero. And either way, the game adapts, reshaping dialogue, quests, and even entire storylines based on your choices. Companions bring their own arcs and personalities, sometimes supporting your decisions, sometimes challenging them, which adds another layer of depth to both story and gameplay. In my own runs, I often found myself replaying sections simply to test how different outcomes would play out, and the variety was bigger than I expected. Combat is tactical, with turn-based mechanics that reward using the environment and planning ahead, but I think most people already know that's just one part of the experience. What really defines it is the scale. It's massive, sprawling, and designed to keep you busy for hundreds of hours if you let it. Everyone already knows it's huge, but that's exactly why it deserves a mention here. Baldur's Gate 3 is a game I enjoy a lot, and it's easy to see why so many people call it one of their favorites. Last Epoch is a game that surprised me with how much time I ended up spending on it. At first, I thought it would be just another action RPG, but the more I played, the more I realized how much depth it actually has. The story is built around time travel, and moving through different eras changes the enemies, the setting, and even the atmosphere of the world. That alone gives it a different identity compared to other games in the genre. The class system starts with 5 options, but each one branches into several advanced paths, and that freedom is what makes it so addictive. The real highlight, though, is the skill system. Every ability has its own progression tree, and even small tweaks can transform the way you play. A spell that starts as a basic fireball can be turned into a chain of explosions or a meteor storm, and a melee strike can evolve into waves of energy. Combat feels smooth and responsive, with effects that are satisfying without being confusing, and it works perfectly with the loot system. Items drop often and actually matter, constantly pushing you to refine your build instead of just stacking numbers. When you reach the endgame, the variety of monoliths, dungeons, and seasonal content keeps you going, always giving you a reason to return. Last Epoch doesn't try to reinvent everything, but it refines what makes the genre fun. For me, it's the kind of RPG that keeps you hooked, not because of hype, but because it's genuinely rewarding to play. Torchlight 2 is one of those RPGs that people keep coming back to because it just feels good to play. Released in 2012, it still holds up as a classic of the genre. The world is colorful and full of personality, standing out from the darker tone that most games usually take. Instead of chasing realism, it embraces a stylized look that gives it charm and makes it instantly recognizable. The story continues right after the first Torchlight, but what really matters here is the gameplay. Combat is fast, responsive, and satisfying, with classes that feel distinct and skill trees that allow plenty of experimentation. Each class comes with 3 specializations, encouraging players to shape builds that fit different playstyles. Loot drops frequently and carries real impact, often changing the way encounters are approached. Another feature that makes Torchlight 2 memorable is the pet system. Pets aren't just companions. They can carry items, sell your loot in town, and even help in battle, adding both strategy and personality to the experience. Multiplayer co-op is another highlight, letting you team up with friends for longer runs, while mods from the community kept the game alive with new content long after release. Torchlight 2 doesn't overload with unnecessary complexity. It focuses on delivering fast-paced combat, rewarding loot, and a world that is fun to explore. Simple, polished, and full of charm, it remains one of the most enjoyable RPGs of its generation. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this list of 12 isometric RPGs worth checking out. Each brings its own style and challenge, and now it's your turn to dive in. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video with more RPGs that deserve your time.